Land acknowledgement is a simple concept. It means you acknowledge where you are and who traditionally held that land. It is a courteous gesture, although alone it is not enough. Furthermore, land acknowledgement can be problematic as the users of this practice typically trace back to the most recent inhabitants of a region of the United States. The information they use to determine that might be biased, incomplete, or not representative of large swaths of time in which a nation actually managed that area. That being said, land acknowledgement is merely a baby step in the right direction, and it is done to help ground people in a place. It helps us remember the people who have been active in caring for a place and keeping it pristine for generations. It is also a way to understand the cultures of that area. For those who were not forcibly removed, or who did not displace another group in settling in their homelands, it is also a way to engage in the culture that has persisted and thrived here. To illustrate this topic, I'm going to speak as Faith here. I'm an Ojibwe and Shawnee climber, snowboarder, hiker, photographer, overall athlete, and outdoor enthusiast. I'm here because for the last decade, I have always felt the need for Indigenous people or their lands on which we recreate to be included or respected in the ways that I would hope. I think it is an important topic so that we can change the ways climbers interact with Native American lands and communities. I've given talks on this topic with various climbing organizations, including REI, Flash Foxy, and other outdoor companies since about 2010. And I've never done it for pay or even for event registration compensation, a detail that some activists point out as a problem. I'm just grateful to do the work, but it can be challenging seeing others getting perks while standing on my traditional lands, even if they're Indigenous but to another part of the country. Another issue that intersects with Indigenous rights and outdoors usage is conservation, and that intersection is wonderfully documented by William Du Bois in the 2011 book titled A Great Aridness: Climate Change and the Future of the American Southwest. When I began addressing climbing conflicts with fellow climbers over a decade ago, one topic was problematic names. These names might seem harmless and hilarious to some, but ostracized others. Names like the Trail of Tears or Squaws in the Heat, given by one demographic to equate native trauma to a joke, comparing us to animals. All around, a very unwelcoming picture for a different and less common demographic for the sport. As a woman in various male-dominated sports, I already understood how ostracizing it can feel to participate, even if the participants around me are welcoming and open. Acknowledging this layer of hurt isn't a cry for sympathy, but more like a frustrating call for respect. Why perpetuate any kind of discrimination if we want to have inclusive sport? Furthermore, if you're using discriminatory language against natives, have you no respect for the land in which you're recreating? Fortunately, climbing is so much more diverse than other sports I've been a part of, including hockey. I worked many years as a Team USA athlete to change those issues, so I appreciate the diversification of climbing that has taken place over the last several decades. That being said, it can still be a challenge to welcome new people into the sport, especially those who feel underrepresented. Historically, Native Americans have not been represented in the climbing industry, and they have also had personal conflicts and challenges to navigating the sport. One conflict is the presence of poaching, or when climbers choose to climb rock formations that are sacred and forbidden to climb, especially those on native-controlled lands. Poaching such sites puts native climbers at odds with non-native participants. As a recap, let's think about the passage of time in this country. From the forming of the country in 1776 to the 1820s, Native nations were seen as being sovereign-to-sovereign relationship with the U.S. 1830s to 1850s, there's the forced Indian removal. From there until the 1890s, we see the reservations and the conditions created, promises broken, annuities not delivered. 1870s also saw a period of assimilation that went until the 1930s and beyond, and culturally in America it is still ongoing. The 1930s to the 1950s saw some self-rule changes revived for tribes, but the 1950s and 1960s also brought termination and assimilation yet again, if you remember by watching our previous videos. With the civil rights movement in the 1960s, we were able to restore some self-determination efforts that, from 1988 until today, now that we're in an era of an alleged self-determination and self-governance. That's an important concept to remember when you think about why and how you're accessing the land that you access. That being said, to climb respectfully, you should do the legwork to know what is off limits and respect it without question. For some climbers are on tribal lands and others remain in sacred spaces. No limitations are arbitrary, and you may not have the privilege of knowing why an area is sacred, but if you're told it is, in honesty, you should just respect it as such and accept it. If you look at how many spaces are open to you, it's the least you can do. You won't be left to dry. One example is Babaquvari Peak, and it's near Tucson, Arizona. It's a sacred space where the Dana'atam guard the west entrance. To access it, you must approach the tribe for a waiver and follow their protocol for visitation, like picking up after yourself. Just a little effort to obey their requests will take you far in terms of respect. In the words of an Indigenous writer, Kovach, our knowledges are bound to place. The author Johnson has reiterated with, our ancestors watched and listened. The land was their book. The land has given us our understandings, beliefs, perceptions, laws, customs. It has bent and shaped our notions of human nature, conduct, and the great laws. The land has given us everything. A lot of Indigenous peoples use the land in their ceremonies. They have oral histories connected to areas, to mountains, and traditional places. Are you required to follow these protocols or acknowledge the land? No, you're not. However, if you're American, you might consider that your ability to thrive is only because of the land exchanges and agreements that we cover on this channel, the transactions that made it possible for this country to exist. You might also have a humanitarian bone that makes you concerned about the welfare and equity of all. In these instances, you will be interested in learning about whose land you're on and following protocol to engage properly when in sacred spaces. The great-grandson of Cochise, Silas Cochise, was once reported to say, a lot of the Indian tribes, the Apache people, have a special blessing or a special saying that goes with being attracted to any land where they may call home. There's a spirit that is there. Would you dare to trespass Mecca or Mount Sinai for the sake of recreation? So why do Indigenous religions get sidestepped so often in this instance? Some communities have bans, like Shiprock on the Navajo Nation, or seasonal bans with Bear Lodge Butte, known as Devil's Tower National Monument, as an insult to the religious ceremonies of over 20 tribes that practice there. The Washoe hold the Cave Rock National Historic Site sacred. The Bishop Paiute have specific requests for the removal of bolts on no end. Everywhere, tribes have thought about their interaction with climbers. To completely ban, to create stipulations, or to ask respect. For climbers and outdoorsmen on these sacred landscapes, the relationship is very important. Just the same way respect the host of a home. You're not required to, it's merely etiquette, respect, a gesture for learning and being a kind human. Sosi said many years ago, one of the primary harms is to negate the reality of Native peoples, separate political and cultural status, and transform them into some quaint aspect of the dominant society's culture. Pointing out that cultural appropriation seen anywhere, even in the outdoors gear and patterns, is an attack on tribal sovereignty. To continue to explore outdoors, we need to create good relationships between our sports and Indigenous communities, and this formation happens through relationship, responsibility, reciprocity, and redistribution, according to Harris and Wasilewski, 2004. The chalk used in climbing is not war paint, and gear, they're not totems. Think about what you say. In the meantime, look at the resources we have provided to help you with your next trip. One of the most common resources to find out whose land you're on is native-lands.ca. However, this resource is not perfect, and it can only capture certain timelines of Indigenous nationhood. That being said, we hope you'll use it to explore and learn more about the culture of the place where you're from and where you are today. We hope you keep land acknowledgement in your mind as you traverse lands around the world and engage in outdoor recreation. We created a petition for REI to change its mountain project route naming protocol in an effort to increase visibility and understanding, and we will link that below. In our upcoming videos, we will explore some contemporary issues to expand our repertoire, so be sure to look at the slide and take a note on exactly how you can make a difference in the future of climbing for Native peoples. So can you climb everywhere? Well, if you follow protocol, it depends. Sometimes the sweeter taste is to admire and go home, as much as our enthusiasts would hate to hear that. What you should do is research the restrictions on climbing, look into local tribal protocols, know whose land you're on and share it using the website we gave and others. And always hashtag and utilize Indigenous names for where you are, and refrain from culturally appropriative language or racist jokes and memes. Respect the space that you're in, support Indigenous efforts to protect such spaces, hire only actual natives. For any guides or other services, buy Indigenous made things, and make space for the specific people for whose land that you're on. For other Indigenous peoples, remember to make space for the people who are from here, because being Indigenous is not a free pass to the entire country unless you're a nationalist. You're Indigenous to one place, not all. So don't perpetuate that pan-Indian idea, and let's be a model for others by remembering that. In our next video, we will look at some current events up north, and as always, be sure to subscribe, provide feedback and requests, and share this channel so we can all be on the same page.